If you like our stories, please like, comment and subscribe for more. Elysia Blackwood was no ordinary fourth-year student. At 14, most students spent their days with their noses buried in textbooks or laughing with friends, but Elysia was different. She was obsessed with the mysteries of the wizarding world. Hogwarts was a place of wonder, but Elysia wanted more. She wanted to understand the past, the untold stories, the forgotten spells, the lost legends. Her classmates could scarcely comprehend her thirst for knowledge, let alone her relentless pursuit of ancient, forbidden magic. And that's exactly how she found herself here, in the bowels of the Hogwarts library, standing before a dusty, neglected shelf that shouldn't exist. The restricted section was, for all intents and purposes, off-limits to students. The enchantments surrounding it were powerful. Rumours even suggested that a curse would fall on anyone foolish enough to wander in. But Elysia wasn't like most students. She had discovered a secret, a way past the enchanted lock that kept it sealed. She had spent weeks studying the library's architecture, learning every trap, every hidden passage, every possible loophole. And tonight she was ready to break the rules. The faint glow of a single candle illuminated the row upon row of ancient tomes, each one holding knowledge that had been kept from the public for generations. Her fingers brushed against the spines, each book a temptation she couldn't resist. But it wasn't the book she was after tonight. It was something much more powerful. A tiny glimmer of silver caught her eye, a shimmering glow hidden among the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat as she drew closer. There, nestled between two ancient scrolls, lay a time-turner. The time-turner. She had read about it in history books, heard whispers of it in the corridors. A magical device so powerful that even the most experienced wizards and witches were warned never to use it. A time-turner had once allowed Hermione Granger to attend multiple classes in one day, but this one felt different. Elysia hesitated. She knew the risks. She had heard the tales of wizards who had tried to alter the past and been torn apart by their own meddling. But the temptation was irresistible. The possibilities of what she could learn, what she could witness. There was no way she could let this slip away. She glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to pop out from behind the towering stacks of books. The library was quiet, the air thick with the scent of old parchment. The night had settled over the castle, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of the wind against the enchanted windows. She was alone, truly alone, and for the first time in weeks she felt a rush of exhilaration. With a single breathless motion, she picked up the time-turner. It was heavier than she expected, cold to the touch, but as soon as her fingers wrapped around it, a strange surge of magic pulsed through her. The world around her seemed to warp, bending like liquid in a storm. "Just one turn," she muttered under her breath, her voice trembling. "One turn to see history." She wasn't sure what she was expecting to happen, but as she twisted the time-turner, the room around her seemed to distort. The candlelight flickered wildly. The shadows stretched and stretched until they enveloped her entirely. She could feel the fabric of time itself bending, twisting, breaking as the timepiece spun faster and faster in her hand. And then, nothing. For a moment, Elysia stood perfectly still, the only sound her ragged breath in the silence of the library. She glanced around, unsure of what to expect, but the room looked the same. The books were still in their shelves, the candles still burning softly. Had she done it wrong? Had it not worked? A strange shiver ran down her spine, and she suddenly felt a pull at the back of her mind. A distant echo. It was faint, like a whisper she couldn't quite make out. But it was there. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realised what had happened. She had travelled back. The library was darker now, the air cooler. The familiar hum of magic was gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. And when she turned around, her eyes widened. A figure was standing in the corner of the room. Not a ghost, not a shadow. A person. Someone she didn't recognise, yet their presence felt oddly familiar. They were dressed in robes she didn't recognise, robes that seemed old-fashioned, out of place in the modern day. The figure stepped forward, their face hidden in the shadows. "Who are you?" Elysia's voice trembled, the words escaping her mouth before she could stop them. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they reached out slowly, almost deliberately, and pointed toward the time-turner in her hand. "You shouldn't have done that." The voice was soft, almost too soft to hear, but there was something chilling about it, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Elysia's heart raced as the figure stepped out of the shadows, their face still obscured by the dim lighting. The library felt colder now, the silence pressing in around her, making it hard to breathe. She clenched the time-turner tighter in her hand, but her fingers felt numb. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had only wanted to see history, not to be caught in it. The figure's movement was slow and deliberate, as though they were carefully choosing every step, every word. Elysia swallowed hard, her mind spinning as she tried to make sense of what was going on. Who was this person? Had she travelled farther than she realised? Was this even the past? Who are you? She repeated, her voice trembling but firm this time. She had to stand her ground. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they tilted their head, their dark eyes finally visible beneath the hood. They had an odd, almost unsettling calmness about them, but there was also something strange about their presence, something that didn't quite fit into the quiet atmosphere of the library. "You're not supposed to be here," the figure said finally, their voice low and eerily calm. "This is not your time." Elysia's eyes widened. Her pulse quickened as the weight of their words sank in. The time turner. Had it sent her to a time before her own? But how far back? And who was this person standing in front of her? Where am I?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. The figure took a step closer, their gaze never leaving hers. "You've meddled with something far beyond your understanding," they said softly, but with a warning edge. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Elysia opened her mouth to speak, but found herself at a loss for words. The enormity of the situation was starting to overwhelm her. She had expected something, anything, to happen when she used the time turner, but she hadn't expected this. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Could this be a different version of the library? Or had she gone back to a time when the library wasn't even built? But no, that didn't make sense. This was Hogwarts. It had to be. She took a hesitant step forward, trying to find the words to ask again, to get some clarity, but before she could speak, the figure held up a hand. "Don't." Their voice was firm now, sharp. "You don't know the consequences of your actions. You've fractured time, and now we all have to deal with it." Elysia's stomach twisted at the words. "Fractured time? I don't understand." The figure finally stepped into the light fully, and Elysia caught a glimpse of their face. There was something familiar about it, something unsettlingly so, but she couldn't place it. The stranger's expression was unreadable, as though they had seen too much and were tired of explaining things to people who couldn't understand. "You will," the figure said softly. "You will, but not yet." With that, they turned and began walking toward the back of the library. Elysia, though confused and afraid, couldn't help but follow. Something in the air had shifted. It was as if the very fabric of reality had begun to unravel. They stopped in front of a large portrait, one that Elysia didn't recognise. The painting was of a man with sharp features and a calculating gaze, wearing robes that seemed to belong to a different era. The figure raised a hand and the portrait swung open, revealing a dark hallway that led deeper into the castle. "What is this place?" Elysia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her feet felt like lead, her curiosity battling with the nagging fear building in her chest. The time turner still dangled from her neck, as if mocking her lack of control over the situation. "This is where it started," the figure replied cryptically, gesturing toward the dark hallway, "where everything changed, where you need to go if you hope to fix this." Elysia glanced down the hallway, then back at the figure. The mystery deepened, and the weight of her mistake pressed heavily on her chest. "I didn't mean to—" "You didn't mean to?" the figure interrupted, their voice rising with an edge of frustration. "No one ever does. But intentions don't matter when you play with time." Elysia swallowed, her heart pounding. She knew she had to follow. She didn't know how, but she had to fix whatever she had broken. There was no going back now. With a final glance at the mysterious figure, she stepped forward into the darkness of the hallway. The air grew colder with every step, and the shadows seemed to whisper around her. The deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to close in, as if the castle itself was holding its breath, waiting. "You can't change history," the figure said softly as they walked beside her, their footsteps echoing in the silence. "But you can repair it. You have to find the moment you disturbed and undo it, before it consumes everything." "Do you know what moment I disturbed?" Elysia asked, her voice tight with uncertainty. She had no idea how she could have done something so catastrophic, but the figure seemed certain. The figure said nothing, but when Elysia glanced up at them, she saw the faintest flicker of regret in their eyes. It was the smallest hint of something, but it was there. Whatever this person knew, they weren't telling her everything. Elysia's heart raced as she followed the mysterious figure deeper into the castle. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, its stone walls damp with age. Each step she took echoed in the silence, and the air grew colder, thicker with each passing moment. The shadows pressed closer, as though they were alive, lurking at the edges of her vision, watching her every move. The figure walked ahead of her, their cloak billowing in the draught, their face still partially obscured by the low light. Elysia couldn't help but feel the weight of their presence. The air around them seemed to hum with quiet power, a power she didn't yet understand but was undeniably real. She gripped the time-turner tighter around her neck, trying to steady her nerves. "Where are we going?" Elysia's voice broke the stillness. She had to know what was happening, but the figure remained silent, their footsteps unfaltering. "What's this place? Why am I here?" The figure's voice finally answered, softer now, yet still carrying that cold edge of authority. "This is the place where time is tethered. The place where you cross the line between what should have been and what is." They stopped suddenly, turning toward her with piercing eyes that seemed to search her soul. "You're here because you made a choice, and that choice fractured the world." Elysia's breath caught in her throat. The weight of the figure's words felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. She had only wanted to see history. She had never imagined it would unravel in front of her like this. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, the words feeling hollow in the cold air. "I only wanted to see history." The figure's voice was sharp, cutting through her apology. "That's always the excuse. You've seen enough to know that meddling with time is a dangerous game. You've played it, and now you must pay the price." Elysia felt a lump form in her throat. She had only wanted to experience the past, to learn from it. How could she have known the consequences? Her mind raced, trying to process what the figure was saying. What did they mean by fractured the world? Could she truly have changed something so fundamental by simply turning the time-turner? "What do you want me to do?" Elysia finally asked, her voice shaky. She felt a mix of fear and desperation. "How do I fix this?" The figure seemed to consider her question for a moment, their dark eyes narrowing. "To fix it, you must undo the change. Find the moment you disrupted, the place where history bent, and set it right." Elysia swallowed hard. It felt impossible. How was she supposed to find such a specific moment in time? How could she even know where she had gone wrong? The figure turned away, gesturing to the shadows ahead. "Come. The answers you seek are not far." They led her down a winding corridor, one that felt older than the rest of the castle, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. The stones beneath her feet were worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and the air smelled faintly of dust and old magic. Elysia couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. What had she gotten herself into? She had thought the time-turner was a harmless tool, a way to glimpse the past. But now it seemed to have opened a door she wasn't prepared to walk through. What if she couldn't fix it? What if by trying she made everything worse? They came to a door at the end of the hallway, a heavy wooden thing, ancient and creaking with age. The figure didn't hesitate, pushing it open with a quiet groan. The room inside was small, lit only by a flickering torch on the wall. Shelves lined the stone walls, filled with books and scrolls, but it wasn't the books that drew her attention. In the centre of the room stood a pedestal, and on the pedestal rested a mirror. It was a beautiful mirror, its silver frame intricately carved with designs Elysia couldn't quite understand. The glass itself was clear, but as she gazed into it, she felt something strange, a ripple of magic that tugged at her very soul. "This," the figure said, gesturing toward the mirror, "is where time is reflected. It shows you not only what was, but what could have been, what should have been." The figure paused, their voice taking on a more somber tone. "It will show you where you went wrong." Elysia stepped forward, her breath caught in her chest. The mirror seemed to beckon her, its surface shimmering with untapped potential. She couldn't help but reach out, her fingers grazing the cool glass. The instant she touched it, the reflection rippled, distorting and warping as if the mirror were alive. Suddenly the room around her faded, and she was pulled into the mirror's depths. The world around her shifted, and Elysia found herself standing in a completely different place, another version of Hogwarts. But this wasn't right. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. The castle was the same, yet something about it felt wrong, twisted. In the distance she saw figures moving, students, teachers, walking through the corridors, but their faces were blank, their eyes hollow. "What is this?" Elysia whispered, her voice shaking. She turned back to the figure, but they were gone. She was alone, trapped in this strange reflection of Hogwarts. The answer, she realised, was right in front of her. This was the moment she had disrupted. The change wasn't just a small thing, it was everything. Elysia's heart raced as she stood frozen in the distorted version of Hogwarts. The castle around her felt alien, suffocating in its unnatural stillness. The students, once vibrant and full of life, now shuffled through the halls as if caught in a trance. Their eyes were empty, their movements stiff and robotic. The very air felt off, the magic within the walls no longer flowing freely but warped, twisted by an unseen hand. She turned back to the mirror, her hand still pressed against its cold surface. The reflection of Hogwarts wavered again, and for a split second, Elysia caught a glimpse of something even more horrifying. A towering figure, cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by shadow, looming over the students. The figure's presence seemed to pull the light from the room, casting everything into a deeper darkness. It was as if the castle itself was being consumed by a malevolent force. Her breath hitched in her throat. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she backed away from the mirror. The image in the reflection did not change. It was as if she was staring into a reality that no longer belonged to her. "This is the result of your meddling," a voice echoed from the darkness behind her. She spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure, the mysterious person who had led her here, had appeared again, standing in the doorway. "You've broken something," the figure said quietly, their voice carrying a mix of regret and sorrow. "The moment you twisted the time turner, you disrupted the flow of time, but it's more than just that. You've created a ripple, a tear in the fabric of reality." Elysia's mind raced. "But I only wanted to see history," she stammered. "I didn't mean to change anything. I didn't think—" "You never do," the figure interrupted, their tone tinged with frustration. "You didn't think, and now this is what we're left with. A fractured timeline, one where things that should have happened didn't. And now the consequences are cascading through time. The balance has been shattered." The figure stepped closer, their expression unreadable. "This is where everything began to unravel. The moment you altered history, you made the path forward uncertain. Now every action, every decision, every life that was meant to unfold differently has been pulled into chaos. And this is the result." Elysia turned her gaze back to the mirror. The image of Hogwarts remained the same, the students moving like hollow shells, their faces devoid of emotion. But now she noticed something new. The towering figure in the distance seemed to be drawing closer. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving toward her, its dark presence swallowing everything in its path. The air grew heavier, colder. The ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate, as if the very foundations of the castle were shaking under the weight of the disturbance she had caused. Her heart raced, fear creeping up her spine as the shadowy figure grew larger and more defined. It was getting closer, and worse, it was coming for her. "You have to fix this," the figure said urgently. "You have to find the moment you disturbed, the exact point where history shifted. You must set it right before everything collapses." "Tell me where," Elysia begged, her voice tight with panic. "Where do I go? How do I fix it?" The figure hesitated, their gaze shifting toward the dark reflection. "You already know," they said softly. "You've already seen the moment. The change didn't happen in the past. It happened here, in the present." Elysia's mind struggled to keep up. The present? What did that mean? She had travelled back in time to witness moments from history. Was it possible that the change hadn't been in the past, but in the very timeline she had been part of? Had she altered something she hadn't even realised? "The mirror is showing you what could have been," the figure continued. "But the timeline isn't static, it's dynamic. And your interference, your curiosity, has made it volatile. The choice you made, however small it seemed to you, was enough to send ripples across time. Those ripples have now collided with the present, and the figure you saw, the one in the mirror, represents the force that's growing stronger. It's a manifestation of the consequences of your actions." Elysia's breath caught in her throat as she turned back to the mirror. The figure in the reflection had fully emerged from the shadows now, its face still obscured but its presence undeniable. The dark figure was no longer just a spectre in the background, it was in the forefront, its form looming over her. And she knew, deep down, that it wasn't just a figment of the mirror. It was real. It was coming. "It's you," Elysia whispered, realisation dawning on her. "It's all because of me." The figure nodded solemnly. "Yes. And now only you can stop it. You need to go back, find the moment where time was bent, and repair it before the fabric of reality unravels completely." Elysia felt the weight of the task before her, the responsibility, the fear. But there was no turning back now. She had made a mistake that had shattered the delicate balance of time. And now she had to face the consequences. "I'll fix it," she said, her voice more determined than she felt. "I'll do whatever it takes." The figure nodded once, then turned and began walking toward the door. "Time is waiting for you to make the right choice," they said. their voice a mere whisper in the thick, heavy air. But the clock is ticking. Elysia's pulse quickened. She had no idea how or even where to begin. But one thing was clear. She couldn't let this force consume everything. Not her world, not Hogwarts, not the people she cared about. She had to make things right, even if she had to face the darkest depths of time itself. With one final glance at the dark reflection in the mirror, Elysia stepped forward into the unknown. Elysia felt her stomach twist as she stepped away from the mirror and into the darkness beyond. The strange force that had been pulling at her since she first touched the time turner seemed to tug harder now. Every step she took felt like it was carrying her further away from the familiar, further into an unknown and broken world. The figure who had led her here remained silent, walking just ahead of her, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of the consequences she now had to face. The hallway they walked down was unfamiliar, but it felt wrong. The stone walls were cracked, the air thicker than it should have been, as though it was no longer part of the world she knew. "Where are we going?" Elysia finally asked, breaking the suffocating silence. She needed answers, something to guide her through this fractured version of Hogwarts. "What exactly am I supposed to fix?" The figure didn't turn to look at her. They didn't even seem to need to speak to guide their steps. They were walking with purpose, and for a moment, Elysia felt like a ghost trailing in their wake. "You're seeking the Nexus," the figure replied cryptically, their voice echoing off the walls. A moment where the threads of time became tangled. It's the fracture point where your meddling began to tear everything apart. You need to return to that moment. Elysia tried to keep up, but the strange, suffocating atmosphere made it hard to focus. It felt like the castle itself was trying to hold her in place, as though time itself was reluctant to let her move forward. Finally, they stopped in front of a large set of double doors. The doors were unlike any she had ever seen in Hogwarts, massive, ancient, with symbols she didn't recognize carved into the wood. As the figure stepped forward, the doors creaked open, revealing a dark, cavernous room beyond. The air smelled like dust, old parchment, and something else, something metallic and strange. "This is it," the figure said softly. "The Nexus, where time converges and fractures, where the timeline splits, the moment you disrupted." Elysia swallowed hard. Her eyes scanned the room, trying to understand what she was seeing. The room seemed to stretch beyond the limits of the castle itself. There was no visible ceiling, no walls, just an endless void that seemed to ripple and pulse with an unnatural energy. Floating in the centre of the room was a single, massive orb, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. It pulsed like a heartbeat, the glow flickering in time with a rhythm Elysia could almost feel. "This," the figure continued, their voice barely above a whisper, "is where you caused the break. It started with the time turner, but it's not just the act of turning it. It's what you chose to do when you travelled through time. You didn't just witness history, you changed it. You altered something at the core of this timeline." Elysia's head spun. She hadn't even realised what she was doing. She thought the time turner would just let her watch, let her witness the past. But now, standing before the pulsating orb, she understood. Her curiosity had broken something fundamental. She had taken a moment that was meant to pass and twisted it, and now it was spiralling out of control. "I didn't mean to," Elysia whispered, more to herself than to the figure. Her fingers tightened around the time turner hanging from her neck. "What happened? What did I change?" The figure stepped closer, their presence looming like a shadow in the dim light. "You saw things that were not meant for you. You witnessed moments that were beyond your grasp, and in doing so, you created an imbalance. Time is not something that can be handled lightly. When you altered the past, the ripples spread out, touching everything. The events you tried to see, they were meant to happen in their own time, not through the lens of your curiosity." The orb before them shimmered, and for a brief moment, Elysia saw flashes of her past, glimpses of her time at Hogwarts, the friends she had made, the lessons she had learned, and then those flashes turned darker. The students she had seen earlier, their faces blank and lifeless, flickered before her eyes. The shadowy figure from the reflection in the mirror was there too, standing in the background, watching her with its unblinking gaze. "You have to undo what you've done," the figure said, their voice hardening. "The timeline is fraying, and soon it will tear completely. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to repair." Elysia nodded, her mind racing. But how? How could she even begin to fix something this broken? She felt small, insignificant in the face of the task ahead. The weight of her mistake hung heavily on her chest, and the thought of trying to repair it all seemed impossible. "Where do I start?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure turned and pointed toward the orb. That is the key. It will show you the exact moment where everything went wrong. But be warned, time will fight you. The further you push into the past, the harder it will be to return. You must be prepared to lose something to fix it. Elysia felt her pulse quicken. Lose something? What did that mean? Her gaze turned back to the orb, its glow intensifying as if urging her forward. With a deep breath, Elysia stepped closer to the orb, her hand trembling as she reached out. She felt a surge of energy the moment her fingers made contact, as if the orb were alive, reacting to her presence. The light flared blindingly, and the world around her began to twist, shifting as if it were being pulled apart. And then everything went dark. Elysia blinked rapidly, her head spinning as the world around her began to fade back into focus. She felt disoriented, as though she had been pulled through the very fabric of time itself. The orb's light had consumed everything, and for a moment there was nothing, just the weight of the darkness pressing in, suffocating her. Then, slowly, the shadows receded, and she found herself standing once again, though not in the room she had just left. She wasn't in the Nexus anymore. She was somewhere else. The air around her was thick and heavy, and she could feel the pulse of magic in the atmosphere, the very essence of time itself surrounding her. The world seemed different here, distant and familiar, but also unsettling, as if she were looking at the world through a veil, a distortion. The castle felt both ancient and new, as though it was still being formed, still growing into the Hogwarts she knew. Elysia took a cautious step forward, her eyes scanning her surroundings. She was standing in the middle of a corridor, the walls lined with portraits that seemed to watch her as she passed, their eyes following her every move. The lighting was dim, the torches flickering with an unnatural glow, casting long shadows across the stone floors. "This is it," she whispered to herself, her voice echoing softly in the quiet hall. This was the moment, the point in time she had to fix. Where was she? What moment was this? And how was she supposed to make things right? She glanced around, searching for a clue, anything that might guide her through the labyrinth of time she had stepped into. Portraits, though lifelike, offered no answers. The hushed whispers from the walls seemed to speak a language she couldn't understand, their voices lost in the silence of the corridor. As she walked further down the hall, she noticed something strange. The air was warmer here, thicker with a sense of foreboding, as though something important, something vital was hanging in the balance. The magic of this place pulsed with an intensity she had never felt before. She had stepped into the past, but it wasn't a past she recognized. "Where am I?" she muttered under her breath, her voice trembling slightly. "What moment is this?" Suddenly the figure appeared again, stepping out from the shadows ahead of her, their dark eyes watching her with a sense of inevitability. They didn't say anything at first, just stared at her with an expression that was almost too calm, too knowing. "This is the past," the figure said quietly, their voice barely above a whisper. "The past you sought to change. But this is not just any moment. This is the point where your actions started the fracture, the moment when you crossed the line." Elysia's heart began to race as the figure's words sank in. The moment when I crossed the line, that meant this was the critical moment she had to fix. But what was it? What had she done? How could she even begin to pinpoint her mistake in such a vast web of time? Before she could ask, the figure raised a hand, gesturing toward the far end of the corridor. There, at the very end, stood a door. It was different from the others. It was intricately carved, the wood aged and weathered, but there was something almost alive about it. The door seemed to hum with magic, as though it was a gateway between worlds. "That door," the figure said, their voice low, "is where everything began to unravel. That is where you'll find the answer. But be careful. Time is not a forgiving place. If you step through that door, you will face the consequences of your actions." Elysia felt her breath catch in her throat. Was she ready to face whatever lay beyond? Was she truly ready to confront the mistake she had made? Her hand instinctively clenched the time-turner around her neck as if for reassurance. It felt like a lifeline, a small, fragile piece of control in a world that was slipping away from her. The figure's gaze softened just for a moment. "Time doesn't give second chances. If you don't fix what you've broken, if you don't set things right, then everything you know will cease to exist as you remember it." With those final words, the figure vanished, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Elysia alone at the edge of the door. The corridor was silent again, the quiet pulse of magic the only sound in the air. Elysia stood there for a moment, her mind racing. Could she really fix it? Could she truly find the moment when time had broken, the key to undoing the ripple she had caused? Every fibre of her being wanted to believe that she could, that she had the power to make it right. But doubt gnawed at her. What if it was already too late? What if time had already decided to correct itself, and her interference only made things worse? Her pulse quickened, the urgency in the figure's voice echoing in her mind. She had to act. The door loomed before her, a portal into whatever past she had disrupted. With one final deep breath, Elysia stepped forward. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound echoing through the stillness. And then, as the door fully opened, the world around her seemed to shift, and she was no longer in the corridor.